There are new rules for businesses, and you need to take action now. In this video, I'm going to cover chemical regulations that are now in effect. There are four main changes to chemical regulations from the 1st of January 2021. Firstly, the UK now has its own independent chemicals classification, labelling and packaging system, known as CLP. As we are no longer a member of the EU or the EU CLP system, the GB classification and labelling system will be based closely on the existing EU CLP regulatory regime, and the UK will effectively adopt the UN Globally Harmonised System, known as GHS, in the same way as the European Union. This will provide continuity for business. The UK will be free to make its own decisions about the hazard classification of chemicals. Secondly, the UK has a new mandatory classification and labelling system and a GB UK mandatory classification and labelling list. The new GB MCL system will enable the UK to make its own decisions to align or take a different decision to other countries or jurisdictions, including the European Union. The UK will not automatically align with harmonised classification and labelling arising from ECHA Risk Assessment Committee opinions or from Commission delegated regulations. Instead, there will be independent consideration by the HSC with input from other experts such as the Environment Agency, where environmental hazards are involved before any decision is taken. By law, HSC, as the GB CLP agency, will have to look at RAC opinions before making a recommendation to the Secretary of State for a final decision by the Secretary of State to be made, with the consent of the devolved administrations. Where the GB CLP agency does not recommend following the RAC opinion, the agency may produce a new proposal for a new or revised GB mandatory classification and labelling requirement, or alternatively, may propose no mandatory classification and labelling at all. As well as considering the scientific justification for proposed mandatory classification and labelling, the GB CLP agency will also consider the impacts of a proposed change on the sectors most likely to be affected. The final recommendation to ministers will take into account a broader picture than is currently the case, although the evidence provided by scientific data will still be the key consideration. We will continue to recognise EU harmonised mandatory classification and labelling for listed substances in Table 3 of Part 6 of the CLP regulation. These entries will be incorporated into the new GB mandatory classification and labelling arrangements and will continue to apply. The UK mandatory classification and labelling list will host all existing MCL substances, all the harmonised classifications, plus new and revised GB MCL entries as agreed, and will be available on the HSC website. Thirdly, there is a new UK notification system. There is a requirement on manufacturers and importers to notify the classification and labelling of the substances they place on the market, whether on their own or in mixtures, where they meet the criteria for notification. Notifications will be made to the GB CLP agency rather than ECHA and will appear in the new UK notification database. Previous notifications to the ECHA classification and labelling inventory made by UK-based notifiers, whether through REACH registration or self-classification, made before the 1st of January 2021, will continue to be recognised and no re-notification will be necessary where the classification and labelling remains as notified. The HSC will also establish and maintain a new GB notification database. Fourthly, UK-based distributors who are currently supplied by the EU EEA are now classified as importers from January 2021 if these supply arrangements continue. As suppliers under GB-CLP, businesses will have the importer obligations when importing substances and mixtures into the United Kingdom from the EU EEA, just as they would as if they were importing from the rest of the world. As importers, they will need to comply with the relevant GB-CLP regulation duties and obligations on importers. UK-based distributors who are currently supplied by the EU EEA will have to ensure they have sufficient competence to carry out the obligations placed on importers by CLP. When exporting to the EU EEA, responsibility for chemicals being imported into the UK from the UK will rest with the EU EEA-based importer. This importer may need details, information and data about the chemicals involved from the UK-based business. The following regulations are unchanged. The majority of the existing CLP regulation requirements will continue to apply. The main duties, obligations on manufacturers, importers, downstream users and distributors, known as suppliers, to classify, label and package the substances and mixtures placed on the market will remain. Suppliers must comply with mandatory, formally harmonised classification and labelling. The UK will effectively adopt the United Nations globally harmonised system in the same way as the EU after the end of the transition period. What will continue? Well, HSC will continue to be active as the GB-CLP agency. HSC has an independent GB regulatory regime that will maintain existing standards and protections and ensure the continued effective and safe management of chemicals to safeguard human health and the environment, working in partnership with the Environment Agency, the VOLD administrations and the departments and agencies. The National GB-CLP Help Desk will still be here, and there will be updated basic guidance on the GB-CLP regulation on the HSC website, outlining the key changes and differences in processes and procedures. HSC will continue to be a world leader in the regulation of chemicals, strengthening and developing our regulatory, technical and scientific knowledge and expertise. The UK will seek to act as a positive influence on the EU and on the rest of the world, mainly through the UK's continuing membership of the UN Subcommittee of Experts on the Globally Harmonised System and the Classification and Labelling of Chemicals. Actions companies can take. You need to understand your obligations and roles under GB-CLP and in the supply chain. Identify whether you need to continue to be supplied by businesses in the EU EEA from January 2021. Decide whether you need help with the duties and obligations of an importer, that is, classification, labelling and packaging of substances and mixtures, and take action. Importers can buy in relevant competence, but the legal obligation rests with them, and they cannot get someone else to take on the obligations on their behalf that would be only representative, which does not exist in GB-CLP. They can only be provided with the technical scientific input. The GB-CLP obligations cannot shift to someone else. You must work with the parties in your supply chain, including exporters, who may be willing to help you, for example, by providing information and data on classification to help meet your classification and labelling obligations. Think about existing stock and consider whether any action on the classification and labelling of your products is necessary. Moving on to GB-CLP notification. The following information will be required in a notification: identity of the notifier, name, address and contact details, identity of the substance, chemical name, including the International Union of Pure and Applied Chemistry or other international chemical name, EC/CAS number, and name, molecular, structural formula composition that covers purity, impurities, and additives. Classification, hazard class and category codes and hazard statements. Justification, for absence of classification, if applicable. Specific concentration limits, M factors and/or acute toxicity estimates, if applicable. And labelling, signal word, hazard pictograms, hazard statements, supplementary hazard statements, if applicable. Technical knowledge will be needed to provide this information. This information is also set out in the GB CLP regulation. Moving on to labelling requirements. Labels are there to help identify hazardous chemicals and explain what the hazards are and how to avoid them. Under GB CLP regulation, there are no significant changes to the labelling requirements. Hazard labelling for substances and mixtures placed on the UK market must be in English, although other languages may also appear in addition to English. Supplemental information on the label, EUH statements and GB UK REACH statements. Other chemical labelling requirements include BPR, PPPR and the detergents regulation. Under GB CLP, the intrinsic hazardous properties of chemicals are communicated to everyone through the supply chain, including to the point of use. This is done through labels with standardized, internationally recognized hazard pictograms, warning phrases, and hazard statements associated with specific hazards, such as explosive, acutely toxic, carcinogenic, and hazardous to the aquatic environment. The label also includes advice on how to minimize or prevent adverse effects resulting from exposure to a hazardous substance or mixture due to its use or disposal. Nearly all these labelling elements come from the UN globally harmonized system of classification and labelling of chemicals. Please follow the QR codes to access the HSE website and for information on EU exit chemical regulations. If you require further assistance or guidance, please contact EU-exit chemicals at hse.gov.uk or reach-it@defra.gov.uk. The new rules are here. You need to take action now so that your business can comply with the new regulations.